Bryan Kohberger truly agree that the gag order in the Idaho 4 quadruple homicide case is protecting his rights? Does Bryan Kohberger truly feel as though that very gag order, suppressing everything being said about the case supposedly, is allotting him a fair trial? I'm ARHayes. This is Convict Thoughts, and I'm scratching my head just thinking about how does Bryan Kohberger actually feel about the gag order that's put into place? Does it even matter? Does he feel as though, at the end of the day, the more and more that he thinks about it, because trust me, as you lay in a jail cell for hour after hour, day after day, week after week, month after month, all the way up to years upon years, you know in your mind at the end of the day, is it that gag order that's put in place truly your benefit as a defendant? Does Bryan Kohberger at all feel as though he even has a chance, for a fair trial? Hell, all of us out here that's watching from afar have to realize, how is there even a chance at a fair trial? This gag order that's put into place states that it actually is in place to protect not only Bryan Kohberger, but the investigative techniques done by law enforcement. Why does that need to be a part of a gag order? The investigative techniques of law enforcement need to be transparent so that each and every single individual that considers to have their freedom. And that's right, ladies and gentlemen, today is the 4th of July, a resemblance of the American society's freedom and rights. Law enforcement should show their techniques, and they should be known so that they are transparent, and we can all, as U.S. citizens, know that step-by-step things are being done appropriately by the law. Not just thrown at a wall hoping that some sort of evidence or accusation against a person will stick so that you could get a guilty verdict within a courtroom. That evidentiary value of the investigation and the collection of evidence shall be transparent to help each and every single one of us better understand that our system is being ran correctly. But even more so than that, they're so worried about protecting whose rights? Is it Bryan Kohberger's? Or are there other things being protected within this case that are more valuable than Bryan Kohberger's rights? Is the IgG information regarding certain family members that may have popped up during the IgG testing, which none of us truly care about the names, the addresses, or those people. You could redact all of that. Not a single one of us would ever worry or care about that information. We just want to know that the testing and the family tree being built was done properly and in a legal manner. Some say it was. But not all of us fully understand the whole step-by-step process that transpired. And at that point, we cannot deem it as being done correctly because we don't know. That's why it's important for things to be done correctly. When an interrogation is done of a suspect, it should be recorded so that all can see there's no questionable situations arising while interrogating that defendant or suspect, or even a witness, for goodness sakes. But Bryan Kohberger, at the end of the day, when it comes to this gag order, protecting his right to a fair trial, how is it even possible? Ladies and gentlemen, before this has even reached the level of beginning a trial process, we've had documentaries, books, and now possibly even movies in regards to this case that are all going to deem Bryan Kohberger is guilty. Name one thing so far that's come out that has slightly, in any form, showed that it could be possible Bryan Kohberger was not guilty. Do you want to know why that would never work? Is it wouldn't sell. If, for some reason, Howard Bloom or any other book writer, because Howard Bloom isn't the first to write a book and he won't be the last, and that's all before trial. But not a single one of them has done anything outside of point the very finger at Bryan Kohberger and accuse him of accomplishing this feat of a crime, of a quadruple homicide. No questions asked, before even the evidence would be known. And they even, in the very backs of their book, list sources. None of them creditable. None of them even real sources. There's not a single person from the FBI that's going to sign their signature, their name, to any bit of evidence that has come out in this case, even though not only people in the media, not only writers like Howard Bloom, but even major big-time content creators on social media platforms have stated FBI leaks gave them this sort of information. One of the biggest, most major announcements very early in this case was done by a very large content creator stating that an FBI agent who had connections to a member of her friend's boyfriend, family, whatever it might have been, even gave details of the sheath being found underneath Ethan. Incorrect information. There's no doubt in my mind, just based off of what we're seeing, that this man's rights are not being protected. And by the very fact that they consider a gag order to be the all-savior for him to be able to get a fair trial, makes me an ex-defendant, ex-suspect, in many of cases sick to my stomach, because I never had to battle the mountain climb that this defendant, Bryan Kohberger, is having to battle. He is screaming to the rooftops, or from the rooftops, or whatever they'll allow him to do, that he is an innocent man, and that he has done so. He has done so since the day he was arrested. If you remember, he utilized the exact same wording that prior to the arrest, and this is very odd, Bill Thompson used in regards to exoneration. Bill Thompson talking about people who had been looked at prior to the arrest of Bryan Kohberger of this case as being exonerated very early on in the investigation, even backtracking. Yes, Bill Thompson, you, the backtracker, backtracking, saying that was probably the wrong word to use. Bryan Kohberger used it, and it sounds like he was pretty serious if and when he said that. And the reason why I say if and when is because I didn't actually hear him myself say it, and probably neither did most of you. So we don't know for sure whether he did, just like we don't know what color underwear he may have been wearing in the eyes of many while he wore gloves separating a green leafy substance that many have tried to tell us what it was into plastic baggies to put into whatever trash can they claim he is. a fair trial? Bryan Kohberger? Let's say the case is heard in Latah County in that very courthouse. How is it possible that the Idaho Statesman and all the other local newspapers that have completely broadcasted this case didn't do enough damage to begin with? But then on top of that, mainstream media's drive and narrative for him to be guilty based upon any little bit of a rumor, not only of his past, of what he could possibly have been doing, example of being fired from the university for many various of reasons that would showcase his whole life crumbling. Or he was stealing credentials so that he could get into the chemical rooms and build bombs. There hasn't been one thing that's come out by anybody that's written, documented, or spoken upon this case in the mainstream light for the money, for the dollars, that ever would give Bryan Kohberger the chance of being innocent. The gag order has actually hurt him. It would be better at this very point if the real and true evidence came out so everybody could be on the same page of transparency. And I believe Bryan Kohberger would literally have a better chance at trying to prove his innocence if the real and factual evidence was out, where those with common sense and not just fantasy writing skills or fantasy movie making skills could dissect through their common sense how the evidence fits the crime and how, if in any way, they could tie back to Bryan Kohberger. At the end of the day, yes, it's important for a fair trial. But even more so at the end of the day, transparency will prove in a very early setting that you're possibly onto the right individual. Let's take the conspiracies out of play. If you don't have actual factual evidence, it would show early, and the transparency would lead many through common sense to know this is going to be a difficult road to prove Bryan Kohberger guilty. Instead, because of this gag order and everything surrounding rumor-wise and everything happening, not only mainstream media or through the different writings, but now even content creators willing to go the extra mile to earn a few extra dollars. And that's right, lady, I'm pointing right, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, it's not just ladies. It's ladies and gentlemen. The dollar bill drives so much of this. Hell, we even have Howard Bloom now discussing a film that could be released and created and gone through the whole motions before this even goes to trial. And what's sad about it is he point blank put it out there that the Gonsalves family, which is driven in the public eye to find justice for their child, wants some action within that movie, all because of what? Money. There would be no other reason. Sure, they can claim that they want to tell their daughter's story within that movie. And maybe they deserve that right. But how much is that worth dollar-wise when it points directly at Bryan Kohberger as the guilty party? Take guilt away from Bryan Kohberger and point as an innocent man possibly being railroaded, and I guarantee you the dollars of all of this dissipates. Even in the YouTube creation world, innocence, if found right now, begins to dissipate the talk on the case, lessening the dollar amount being earned. people would have to move on to the next step and the next case. Who is the actual gag order protecting? Because at the end of the day, and I'll scream it from the rooftops, being an ex-defendant, sitting in that defendant's chair, fighting for life, fighting for the next day of freedom. It doesn't earn you a fair trial. It doesn't. Not in a case of this magnitude. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to say it, but at this very point, a guilty verdict is deemed at this very point due to a gag order. And people would want to argue with me that it's deemed because Bryan Kohberger committed the crime, and there's no doubt about that. But there's been no chance for doubt. There's been no chance for reasonable doubt, because Bryan Kohberger has already been crucified by the masses, the narratives, and the very gag order that locks his entire case down. There's no transparency. There's no transparency in the Idaho 4 case. There never has been, and there never will be. The moment that law enforcement took the very microphone and began speaking to you and I and all of us about everybody in the home being asleep and every little hidden thing in regards to this case, like the bolo of the white Hyundai Elantra, even though they were already onto it. They were already knowledgeable of Bryan Kohberger's Hyundai Elantra. They were still putting out false bolos for information. There is no fair trial in Idaho. Doesn't matter where they move it. The trial has already happened, ladies and gentlemen. The trial of Bryan Kohberger in the quadruple homicide has already happened. Now we just got to go through the footsteps and let it walk its way through court. And we can all thank the hiding behind a gag order that allowed it all to happen. ARHayes, Convict Thoughts. Had to share with you how I felt. I hope you have a great holiday weekend, by the way. 4th of July is upon us.